The Galactic Council building stretched high into the purple sky of Nexus Prime. Its glass walls caught the light from 3 different suns, making rainbow patterns on the floor inside. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the long hallways, her soft shoes making almost no sound on the smooth metal floor. She had been doing this walk for 3 years now. Every day, she came to these meetings where the most powerful species in the galaxy decided things that affected billions of lives. Every day, she sat at the small table marked Terra and listened to beings who thought humans were not very important. Elena did not mind this. She had learned long ago that people often said more when they thought you were not listening carefully. Today felt different. The air in the building seemed heavy, like the moment before a storm. Security guards stood at every corner. Their weapons were not hidden like usual. The other diplomats walked faster than normal, talking in quiet voices with worried looks on their faces. The Korath were angry again. Elena could tell by the way Ambassador Krex's neck plates stood up when he walked past her. The Korath looked like giant lizards with too many teeth. They had conquered half their part of the galaxy before joining the Council. They still thought fighting was the best way to solve problems. The Etherian Collective was not happy either. Their ambassador, a being made of blue light that lived inside a floating metal body, had been sending data streams to their homeworld all morning. The Etherians loved logic and rules. They thought feelings were messy and got in the way of good decisions. The Mandorian Trade Federation was the 3rd major power. Their ambassador looked like a furry bear that walked on 2 legs. But Elena knew the cute appearance was misleading. The Mandorians controlled most of the trade routes in the galaxy. They could make whole planets go hungry by stopping their food shipments. These 3 groups had kept peace for over 300 years. Not because they liked each other, but because they needed each other. The Korath were strong fighters but not good at building things. The Etherians could build amazing technology but were not good at growing food or making basic supplies. The Mandorians could move anything anywhere, but they needed protection from space pirates and raiders. For 3 centuries, they had made deals. The Korath would protect trade ships. The Etherians would share technology. The Mandorians would make sure everyone had what they needed. It worked because everyone got something they wanted. But now there was a problem. A big, empty area of space called the Void Territories sat between all 3 empires. For years, nobody cared about it. There were no planets with people on them, no valuable minerals or gases to mine, no trade routes went through it. Then the Etherians found something. Deep scans showed the empty space was not really empty. There were tiny particles floating in it that could be used to make a new kind of space engine, an engine that could make ships travel faster than anything in the galaxy. Suddenly, everyone wanted the Void Territories. The Korath said it belonged to them because their ancient war songs mentioned the great emptiness where warriors rest. The Etherians said their computers proved they had the right to develop it because they found the particles first. The Mandorians said any new technology should be shared fairly through trade agreements they would control. Elena sat in the observers section and watched the arguments grow worse each day. At first, the talks had been polite. Each side presented their case with fancy words and old laws, but as weeks passed, the politeness started to crack. The Korath ambassador began making sounds that meant challenge in their language. The Etherians started calculating war probabilities out loud. The Mandorian began releasing stress chemicals that made other species feel nervous. Elena took notes on everything. Not because her government told her to, but because she found it interesting. Back on Earth, she had studied how people acted when they were scared or angry. She learned that what people said was often not what they really meant. When the Korath talked about ancient warrior songs, they were really saying they felt left out in a galaxy that did not value fighting anymore. When the Etherians talked about computer logic, they were really saying they thought other species were too emotional to make good decisions. When the Mandorians talked about fair trade, they were really saying they were scared that new technology would make their shipping business less important. But none of them would admit these real feelings. Instead, they hid behind laws and traditions and scientific reports. Elena watched and listened and wrote in her notes. She saw how each species had certain ways they acted when they were worried. The Korath got louder and stood taller. The Etherians started doing more calculations and speaking faster. The Mandorians began making more trade offers to species that were not even part of the argument. The human section of the council had only 50 people working there. Compare that to thousands from each major power. Most other diplomats forgot humans were even in the room. They thought humans were too new and too weak to matter. This was fine with Elena. Being ignored meant people said things around her they might not say otherwise. They argued in front of her like she was furniture. They made plans while she sat quietly in the corner. What they did not know was that Elena understood 6 different alien languages. Her government had spent years teaching her not just words, but how each species thought and felt. She could tell when someone was lying, scared, angry, or trying to hide something. As the weeks passed, Elena saw the real problem. Each species was so busy trying to look strong and smart that they could not see what the others actually wanted. They were all talking, but nobody was really listening, and Elena was starting to think that someone needed to tell them this. Soon, the trouble was getting worse every day. Ships were moving toward the void territories. War fleets that were supposed to be for protection were getting bigger. Trade was slowing down as species started hoarding supplies. Elena knew that if someone did not speak up soon, the 300 years of peace might end. And when these 3 powers fought, the whole galaxy would suffer. She just had to figure out the right time and the right words to make them listen. The emergency meeting alarm woke Elena at 3 in the morning. Red lights flashed in her small apartment on Nexus Prime as the Council's urgent message played through the speakers. All diplomats were to report immediately to the main chamber. Elena dressed quickly and ran through the empty streets. Other diplomats were doing the same, their faces worried in the glow of the streetlights. Something big had happened. The council chamber was full of nervous energy when Elena arrived. Security guards with heavy weapons stood at every door. The usual calm order of the room was gone. Diplomats talked in quick, worried voices. Some were shouting into communication devices, trying to reach their home governments. Elena took her seat and looked around. The 3 main tables were surrounded by military advisors she had never seen before. War planners in uniform sat next to the usual diplomatic staff. This was not good. Council President Nara called for order. The amphibian leader's skin had changed to a deep red color, which meant she was very stressed. Her voice echoed through the chamber's speakers. "We have an emergency," President Nara announced. 3 hours ago, the Korath Empire moved a battle fleet to the edge of the void territories. They claim this is a defensive measure to protect their historical claims. Ambassador Krex stood up. His neck plates were fully extended now, making him look even bigger and more dangerous. "The Korath military protects what belongs to Korath," he said in his deep, growling voice. "Ancient laws give us the right to guard our ancestors' resting places." Murmurs filled the room. Elena noticed how Krex's translator was working hard to make his words sound diplomatic. In the original Korath language, he was probably saying something much more threatening. President Nara continued. 1 hour after the Korath fleet arrived, the Etherian collective sent their own ships to the area. They also claim this is defensive. The Etherian ambassador's blue light pulsed brighter inside its metal shell. "Logic dictates protective measures when aggressive forces threaten scientific research," it said in its electronic voice. "Probability calculations show 73.4% chance of Korath military interference with legitimate exploration activities." Now the Mandorian ambassador stood up. Elena could smell the stress chemicals he was releasing. "The Trade Federation cannot allow military fleets to block important shipping lanes," he said. "Our merchant protection fleet is moving to keep trade routes open." Elena felt her stomach sink. 3 military fleets were now facing each other in empty space. Each one claimed they were only protecting themselves, but everyone knew better. This was how wars started. The next 6 hours were some of the longest Elena had ever experienced. Each delegation gave speeches, explaining why their fleet was necessary and peaceful. Each one presented evidence that the other 2 were being aggressive. Each one demanded that the others pull back their ships first. As the morning went on, the speeches got longer and angrier. Translators worked overtime to turn growing hostility into diplomatic language. But Elena could see through the polite words. Ambassador Krex started pacing while he spoke. His claws clicked on the floor like weapons being sharpened. He talked about Korath honor and warrior traditions. He mentioned battles from thousands of years ago. His voice got louder with each sentence. The Korath do not retreat when we are in the right, he declared. Our ancestors died for those territories. Their spirits demand we protect what is ours, by blood and conquest. The Etherean ambassador responded with data. Lots and lots of data. Charts and graphs appeared on the room's big screens. Mathematical formulas scrolled past faster than most species could read them. Historical claims lack logical foundation, the Etherean announced. Computer analysis of legal precedents indicates 94.7% probability that development rights belong to the first species to identify valuable resources. Etherean science discovered the exotic particles. Therefore, Etherean law applies. The Mandorian ambassador started releasing more stress chemicals. The smell was getting strong enough to make some other diplomats leave their seats and move farther away. Trade law is older than both warrior codes and scientific claims, the Mandorian said. The galaxy runs on commerce. Anything that affects trade affects everyone. The void territories must be managed fairly by neutral trade authorities. Elena watched this go back and forth for hours. Each species made the same arguments over and over, just with different words. Nobody was listening to what the others actually said. They were all too busy thinking about what they would say next. Worse, Elena could see that each delegation was getting reports from their fleets. The military situation was getting more tense by the hour. Ships were moving closer to each other. Weapons were being powered up. Smaller species were pulling their own ships away from the area. By afternoon, the polite language started breaking down completely. The Korath ambassador was making sounds that did not translate well. Low growls and clicking noises that made the hair on Elena's neck stand up. His species used those sounds to challenge enemies before fights. The Etherean was broadcasting subsonic frequencies. Elena could not hear them, but she could feel them as a low vibration in her chest. Other species in the room were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The Ethereans used those sounds to show they were calculating combat scenarios. The Mandorian was releasing so many stress chemicals that the air filtration system was working at full power. The smell was making some diplomats actually sick. His fur was standing up and his small eyes were darting around the room like he was looking for escape routes. Elena realized something terrible. These three species were not just arguing with words anymore. They were starting to show the physical signs that meant they were ready to fight. Their bodies were preparing for war even while their minds still tried to talk. President Nara tried to call for breaks and cooling off periods, but each time the talks resumed, the anger was a little bit worse. The accusations were a little bit stronger. The demands were a little bit more impossible to accept. Elena looked around the chamber and saw fear on the faces of diplomats from smaller species. They knew what was coming. When the big three powers went to war, everyone else got caught in the middle. Trade would stop. Colonies would be cut off from supplies. Neutral worlds would be forced to choose sides. As the sun was setting outside the chamber's windows, Elena made a decision. Someone had to speak up. Someone had to tell these three powers what they were really doing to themselves and everyone else. She just had to wait for the right moment. And she had to find words that would make them actually listen, instead of just getting more angry. The moment came sooner than she expected. The argument reached its peak just as the third sun was setting. Ambassador Krex had been speaking for 20 minutes straight, his voice rising to what Elena recognized as a war cry. The translator was struggling to keep up with the increasingly aggressive Korath words. "You speak of logic, metal dweller," Krex roared at the Etherean. "But you understand nothing of honor. Your people hide behind computers because you are afraid to face truth with your own eyes." The Etherean ambassador's blue light flared bright enough to hurt people's eyes. "Emotional responses, cloud judgment," it replied, its electronic voice crackling with static. Korath aggression proves exactly why logical species must control dangerous technologies. You would use new engines to build bigger warships, and you would use them to control everyone else's thoughts. The Mandorian ambassador shot back. His stress chemicals were so strong now that some diplomats had put on breathing masks. "Both of your species want power. At least we Mandorians are honest about wanting profit. Elena sat quietly in her chair and watched the three most powerful beings in the galaxy tear each other apart with words. Around the room, smaller species looked terrified. Some were already leaving, probably to warn their home worlds to prepare for war, but Elena saw something else. She saw three scared leaders who had painted themselves into corners they could not get out of. Krex was not really angry about the Void territories. He was angry because the galaxy did not respect his people anymore. Korath warriors had once been heroes who protected trade ships and fought space pirates. But modern technology meant fewer ships needed protection. Automated defense systems were replacing Korath guards. His people felt useless in a peaceful galaxy. The Etherian was not really worried about Korath aggression. It was worried that other species would never accept Etherian leadership. For all their logic and computing power, the Etherians had trouble understanding how other species felt. This made them bad at making decisions that everyone could accept. They thought if they controlled the new technology, they could finally prove their way was best. The Mandorian was not really concerned about trade routes. He was scared that new engines would make his people's shipping business worthless. If every species could build super-fast ships, they would not need Mandorian trade networks anymore. His people's whole way of life was built on being the galaxy's delivery service. None of them could say these things out loud. That would mean admitting weakness. So instead, they argued about laws and rights and traditions that did not really matter. Elena had been taking notes through the whole meeting. Her small notebook was full of observations about body language, voice patterns, and the real meanings behind diplomatic words. She had done this kind of analysis many times before, but never for something this important. The argument was getting worse. Krex had started making challenge gestures with his claws. The Etherian was broadcasting louder subsonic frequencies. The Mandorian was backing away from both of them while releasing alarm chemicals. President Nara tried to restore order. "The Council calls for calm discussion," she announced. But her own skin was bright orange with stress, and her voice shook. That was when Elena realized someone had to speak up. Not just to stop this argument, but to save the peace that had lasted for 3 centuries. These three powers were about to destroy everything because they were too proud to admit what they were really afraid of. Elena stood up slowly and raised her hand. The movement was so unexpected that the whole room turned to look at her. Even Krex stopped his war cries. The chamber became completely silent for the first time in hours. Elena looked around the room calmly. She met the eyes of every major delegation. She could feel hundreds of beings watching her, waiting to see what the human would say. Most of them probably expected her to make some weak plea for peace. Elena's heart was beating fast, but her voice was steady when she spoke. The words came out clear and calm, carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. "The fascinating thing about this conflict is that none of you are fighting over what you actually want." The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the kind of absolute quiet that happens when predators suddenly realize they are being hunted. Elena could see the exact moment when each delegation understood what she had just said. Ambassador Krex froze in the middle of a threatening gesture. His neck plate slowly flattened against his body. His yellow eyes stared at Elena with an expression she had never seen on a Korath face before. Fear. The Etherian ambassador's blue light dimmed to almost nothing. Its electronic systems made quiet beeping sounds as it processed what Elena had said. For a being that prided itself on logical thinking, it was having trouble calculating this new information. The Mandorian ambassador stopped releasing stress chemicals so suddenly that the air filtration system made an odd noise. His small dark eyes were wide with shock. His fur was standing up even more than before. Elena could see the same realization spreading through all 3 delegations. If the human knew what they really wanted, then she knew things they had never told anyone. She understood their secrets, their fears, their weaknesses, and if one human knew these things, how much did the rest of humanity know? Elena remained standing, waiting for someone to respond. But the 3 ambassadors seemed unable to speak. They were still processing the idea that their carefully hidden motivations were not hidden at all. Around the room, diplomats from smaller species began to sit up straighter. They sensed something important had just happened, even if they were not sure what it was. President Nara's skin was cycling through several different colors as she tried to figure out what to do. This was not covered in any diplomatic protocol, she knew. Elena knew she had their attention now. She also knew she had to be very careful with her next words. She had just revealed that humanity understood the galaxy's politics better than anyone realized. That made humans either very valuable allies or very dangerous enemies. The three major powers would have to decide which one they thought humans were. Elena looked at each delegation again. Then she sat back down and waited to see what they would do with the truth she had just given them. The silence stretched on. Somewhere in that quiet room, the old galaxy was ending, and a new one was being born. The emergency session ended without any decisions being made. The three major ambassadors left quickly, each one making urgent calls to their home governments. Elena watched them go, knowing that her words had started something that could not be stopped. Within hours, the news spread across the galaxy faster than any military fleet could travel. The human diplomat had said something that shocked the council into silence. Word passed from ship to ship, planet to planet, through communication networks and trade routes. But the real story was not what Elena had said. It was what her words meant. Elena returned to her small apartment and found 3 messages waiting. The first was from the Korath embassy, requesting an immediate private meeting. The second was from the Etherian Collective, asking for urgent consultations. The third was from the Mandorian Trade Federation, offering exclusive trade agreements with Earth. She deleted all 3 without answering and went to sleep. Tomorrow would be complicated enough without rushing into anything tonight. While Elena slept, intelligence agencies across the galaxy worked through the night. In war rooms and strategy centers, military leaders and government officials asked the same questions. What did the humans know? How long had they known it? And what were they planning to do with that knowledge? On the Korath homeworld, General Vex slammed his clawed fist on the metal table. How did they see through our warrior traditions? He demanded of his intelligence staff. We have been careful to show only strength and honor. His chief analyst, a smaller Korath with faded battle scars, spoke nervously. Sir, we have reviewed all our interactions with human diplomats. They attend every public meeting. They ask simple questions. They take many notes. We thought they were just learning. Learning what? General Vex roared. Everything, sir. How we stand when we are worried. How our voices change when we are scared. What we really mean when we talk about honor and ancestors. The analyst's neck plates flattened with fear. They have been studying us like scientists study insects. In the crystal towers of the Etherian homeworld, similar conversations were happening at the speed of light. Electronic minds that could process millions of calculations per second were struggling with a simple problem. Their perfect logic had been seen through by a species they considered emotionally primitive. Senior Analyst 7742 broadcast its findings to the collective leadership. Human observation patterns suggest comprehensive behavioral analysis spanning 50 years. They have recorded 12,847 instances of Etherian diplomatic contact. Cross-reference with psychological profiles indicates 99.2% accuracy in predicting our responses. The collective leadership processed this information. Explain how inferior minds achieved superior analysis. They demanded. Working hypothesis. Humans understand emotion logic connections that we have dismissed as irrelevant variables. 7,742 replied. They see patterns we cannot calculate because we do not recognize their importance. On the Mandorian trading stations, merchant captains gathered in worried groups. Their economics were based on being the middlemen for everything in the galaxy. But what if humans could predict their business decisions better than they could themselves? Captain Oro, the Federation's senior trade analyst, reviewed the data with growing concern. Look at this, he said to his colleagues, his fur bristling with anxiety. Every major trade deal we have made in the last 10 years, humans have asked questions about it. Not suspicious questions, just interested questions. What kind of questions? Asked Captain Hana. Questions about why we chose certain routes. Why we preferred some partners over others. What we were worried about. Oro's stress chemicals filled the room. They were not trying to steal our trade secrets. They were learning how we think about business. And now they know, Captain Hana whispered. The implications were staggering. Humans had been conducting the most successful intelligence operation in galactic history, and they had done it completely in the open. No spies. No secret codes. No stolen documents. They had simply listened to what everyone said and understood what it really meant. But the most disturbing part was what humans had not done with this knowledge. They had not used it to gain trade advantages. They had not sold information to the highest bidder. They had not built military alliances against their enemies. For 50 years, they had just watched and learned and kept their understanding to themselves. Until now, 3 days after Elena's statement, something unprecedented happened. Small species that had been ignored by the major powers started getting visits from human diplomats. On the ocean world of Aquatica, where the fish-like Serenians lived in underwater cities, Ambassador Chen arrived with a simple message. "We think your people have ideas about sustainable technology that the galaxy needs to hear," she said. "Would you like help presenting them to the Council?" On the desert planet of Zephyr, where the nomadic wanderer clans barely had enough water to survive, Ambassador Rodriguez showed up with detailed plans. "We have been studying your resource management techniques," he said. "They are more efficient than anything the major powers use. The Mandorians should learn from you, not the other way around." On the frozen moon of Crystalla, where the crystal beings called the Fragments lived in isolation, Ambassador Kim made an offer that had never been made before. "Your people understand mathematics in ways that could improve Etherian calculations," she said. "We would like to arrange meetings between your scholars and their computers." Word of these meetings reached the major powers quickly. Suddenly, humans were not just observing galactic politics. They were changing them. The Korath, Etherians, and Mandorians found themselves in a situation they had never faced before. A species they had ignored was talking to other species they had ignored. And somehow, these conversations were making their own problems seem less important. More worrying was what the smaller species were saying about humans. They trusted them in a way they had never trusted the major powers. When a human diplomat said something, other species believed it was true and helpful, not manipulative. Elena received a new message on the 5th day. This one was not from any of the 3 major powers. It was from President Nara of the Galactic Council. "Ambassador Vasquez," the message said, "the Council would like to discuss expanded roles for human diplomacy in ongoing disputes. We believe your people may have insights that could benefit everyone. We believe your people may have insights that could benefit everyone." Elena smiled as she read the message. This was what she had been hoping for. Not that humans would become another major power competing with the others, but that they would become the species that helped everyone understand each other better. She sent back a simple reply. "We would be honored to help in any way we can." That evening, Elena looked out the window of her apartment at the lights of Nexus Prime. Ships from 100 different worlds moved through the sky, carrying beings who had been suspicious of each other for centuries. But maybe, just maybe, humanity could help change that. The galaxy was about to learn that the most powerful weapon was not superior technology or military force. It was the ability to see truth through the lies people told themselves, and the courage to speak that truth when it mattered most. And humans, it turned out, were very good at both. 6 months after Elena spoke her famous sentence, the Galactic Council looked completely different. The same species sat at the same tables. But the way they talked to each other had changed forever. The war that everyone expected never happened. Instead, something much more interesting occurred. It started with a private meeting that Elena arranged between Ambassador Krex and a representative from the Serenian waterworld. The Serenians had ancient stories about honor that were different from Korath traditions, but just as old and respected. "Your people understand warrior codes," the Serenian diplomat told Krex through the water-filled helmet she wore. "But your codes were written for a time of constant war. Our codes were written for protecting peaceful communities. Perhaps together we could write new codes for protecting a peaceful galaxy." Krex sat quietly for a long time, his neck plates slowly relaxing. For the first time in years, someone was not telling him that warrior traditions were wrong. They were suggesting that warrior traditions could grow and change while staying true to their core values. What would these new codes look like? Krex asked. Elena watched from the corner of the room as two very different species began working together on something that had never been tried before. New traditions that honored the past while building a better future. The Etherian situation was harder to solve, but Elena had learned something important about them. They were not really trying to control other species. They were trying to prove that logical thinking was valuable. The problem was that their logic ignored feelings, which made other species think they were cold and uncaring. Elena arranged for the Etherian ambassador to meet with scholars from the fragment crystal beings. The fragments understood mathematics in ways that even Etherian computers found impressive. But their math included emotional variables that Etherian logic had always ignored. "Your calculations are beautiful," the fragment scholar told the Etherian through a special translation device. "But they are incomplete. You compute what species will do, but not why they want to do it. Add emotional mathematics to your logical systems, and your predictions will become perfect." The Etherian's blue light pulsed thoughtfully. "Emotional mathematics," it repeated. "We had not considered that feelings could be calculated like other variables." "Everything can be calculated," the fragment replied, its crystal body ringing with musical tones. "Even love and fear, and hope. You just need the right kind of math." For the first time in Etherian history, their perfect logic admitted it was incomplete, and instead of being embarrassed, they were excited to learn something new. The Mandorian solution came from an unexpected source. Elena introduced them to the Wanderer clans from the desert world. The Wanderers had built a trading network that was small but incredibly efficient. They never controlled anyone else's business. Instead, they found ways to help everyone succeed together. "Your federation thinks trade is about owning the routes between places," the Wanderer clan leader explained to the Mandorian ambassador. "But the best trade is about making sure everyone has what they need to be happy and productive. When people are successful, they buy more things. When they buy more things, traders make more profit, help others succeed, and you succeed too." The Mandorian's stress chemicals changed to something Elena had never smelled before. It took her a moment to realize he was releasing happy chemicals instead of worried ones. "You mean we could make more profit by helping our customers instead of controlling them?" the ambassador asked. "Much more profit," the Wanderer confirmed. "And everyone would trust you instead of being afraid of you." These conversations took months to develop into real solutions, but slowly, the three major powers started changing how they approached the galaxy's problems. The Korath established something called the Heritage Guard. Instead of conquering territories, they became protectors of important historical sites for all species. Ancient ruins, battlefields, and cultural monuments throughout the galaxy came under Korath protection. Their warriors finally had a job that everyone respected and needed. The Etherian Collective created the Advisory Council. Any species could ask them for help solving complex problems, and the Etherians would provide analysis that included both logical and emotional factors. Their advice became so valuable that worlds lined up to request consultations. The Mandorian Trade Federation developed something called the Prosperity Network. Instead of controlling trade routes, they helped smaller species build their own trading systems. They made their profit by taking a small percentage of everyone's success, which meant they got richer when everyone else got richer too. The Void Territories problem solved itself in a way nobody had expected. Elena suggested that since all three powers wanted it, and since it was empty space that nobody actually lived in, it could become something new. A neutral meeting place that belonged to everyone and no one. The territories became the galaxy's first truly international space. Representatives from every species could meet there to discuss problems and make agreements. The exotic particles that started the whole conflict were shared equally among all species, with the technology developed jointly by Etherian scientists and fragment mathematicians. But the most important change was not in any specific solution. It was in how problems got solved. Elena's final speech to the council became the foundation for new diplomatic rules. She stood at the center of the great chamber, with representatives from hundreds of worlds listening carefully to her words. "The greatest barriers to peace are not the differences between us," she said. They are the lies we tell ourselves about what we really want. Humans learned long ago that the most effective weapon against conflict is not superior firepower, but superior honesty. She paused to look around the room, meeting the eyes of beings from worlds she had never seen. When the Korath say they fight for honor, they are really saying they want to matter in a galaxy that values peace. When the Etherians say they calculate for logic, they are really saying they want others to trust their wisdom. When the Mandorians say they trade for profit, they are really saying they want to keep their families safe and fed. Elena's voice grew stronger as she continued. None of these wants are wrong. All of them are good goals that we can help each other achieve. But only if we are brave enough to say what we really mean, instead of hiding behind pride and fear. The chamber was completely silent as Elena finished her speech. Then, slowly, Ambassador Krex stood up and began the slow clapping that meant approval in Korath culture. The Etherian's blue light pulsed in harmonious patterns. The Mandorian released chemicals that smelled like flowers after rain. One by one, every delegation in the chamber stood and showed their approval in their own ways. For the first time in galactic history, hundreds of different species agreed on something completely. As Elena returned to her seat, she knew that the galaxy had not just avoided one war. It had learned a new way to prevent all wars, and humanity, still not the strongest or smartest species, had become the most trusted one. Because sometimes the greatest power is not the ability to force others to do what you want. Sometimes the greatest power is the ability to help others understand what they really want, and then help them achieve it. The galaxy was finally growing up, and humans were proud to help show the way.